Time for our political forum. Would you please welcome into the studio Doug Cameron, who's the Labor New South Wales Senator, of course, and Human Resources and Human Services spokesman. Doug, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good to have you in the studio. And
Thank you.
From Parramatta, the former Liberal member for Parramatta, Ross Cameron, joins us as well. Afternoon, Ross.
G'day.
I was going to say, I keep saying good morning, which indicates where I've been broadcasting recently. And, of course, businessman, ad man, former Howard government advisor. I'm not sure whether that's how he likes to be known to travel these days. Jeff Cousins, well known to the program, of course. G'day, Jeff.
He's a member for nothing.
Member for nothing. Man at large. Yes, perhaps. All right, our topics this afternoon. We've got a few. A Fairfax media survey has found that only 2 of 35 economists asked thought that the government's direct action policy was a good way of dealing with greenhouse gas emissions. Now, apart from the rights and wrongs of all of that, I don't want to talk about that, but BT economist Dr. Chris Caden added that any economist who suggested anything other than an emissions trading scheme should, quote, hand his degree back. Aren't governments obliged to accept expert advice and act accordingly, even if it is politically unpalatable? And to what extent are governments allowed to ignore advice from experts and just pursue their own agendas? Ross Cameron.
Well, any time you ask a group of economists whether they prefer a policy setting in which economists will be the rock stars, or in which economists will be largely irrelevant. Look, there is going to be a tendency to prefer the rock star.
Are you suggesting they know nothing?
No, not at all. But what I am suggesting is that we all are creatures of our environment, and in fact I totally accept the proposition that government should be open to advice from whatever its source, whether it is convenient or inconvenient, but I do think in relation to a mechanism for getting to our Kyoto targets, to me, this is a line ball decision. People of good faith and good conscience, well-informed people can go either way. There are half a dozen good reasons why a market-based mechanism for carbon is a difficult and, in some cases, dangerous proposition. The first one of which is we found that if a market is going to work properly, it must be deep and it must be liquid. And so the New Zealand attempt at a market was an abject failure because it wasn't deep enough. The Australians saw that, so they said, okay, well, we'll have to go and link to the European market. The European market, during the collapse of its economy, also collapsed.
Can I just suggest, though, we all have views about these things, but we're not experts in these matters. And if we want to find out what is likely to be an efficient market mechanism, shouldn't we rely on the advice of people who spend their time thinking about these things? Jeff Cousins.
Yes, that probably would be quite a good idea. Imagine if you were running a big company and every expert told you that what you were planning to do was completely wrong. And it's not only economists who are suggesting that the so-called direct action plan is not a good one. It's just about anyone who has any involvement in environmental matters. And of course, it was Tony Abbott's great hero, John Howard, who first suggested such a scheme, and Tony was then a member of that cabinet and supported it. Many Western leaders have put this forward. Not too many have got it through because there's been strong opposition and it's been difficult. The President of the United States tried it, couldn't get it through the Parliament, through the Congress, and so on. But generally speaking, your question is really aimed at, ought you to take advice from people who are experts?
Who know about these things.
Once you have taken the responsibility of trying to run a country. And surely the answer to that must be yes. It is not satisfactory just to say, well, look, we took this policy to an election. I mean, this thing was cobbled together simply to have a different policy to the government's policy at that time. That's all it was. And you can't then just say, we have a mandate, we have a mandate. People didn't vote on every single little individual policy. They just had a general impression that the government that had been in power had wasted its opportunities and they wanted to change.
Doug Cameron, are governments obliged, or should we as electors, as the community say, you are obliged to take advice from people? You can't just make up your own mind about these complex issues.
Not on every issue an economist would raise, but on this issue I think the answer is yes, because the economists are responding to the environmental scientists. And that's the key issue here. The scientists have said something has to be done about it. The economists have sat down and looked at what is the best and most efficient way to deal with it. It's a market-based approach.
We're not talking about the rights and
is.
wrongs of whether it's happening or not. I think sensibly we say yes, it is. Yeah. But the question is, given we have to do something about it, what's the best way to get greenhouse gas emissions down? It's not as though there's real division between economists. I mean, 2 out of 35 is hardly division. Is it, Ross Cameron?
Well, look, all you need to ask is Australia at 1.5% of global emissions is not a market maker. We are a price taker. And all of our major competitors, as you rightly point out, or no, I think as Jeff points out, the United States does not have a price on carbon. Following the Fukushima disaster, the Japanese went into massive backpedal in relation to their plans. The South Koreans likewise have delayed the implementation. You've got China, which has delivered more coal-fired generating capacity between 2006 and 2012. They delivered the whole of Australia's coal-fired grid every year.
But with respect, you're describing the problem,
so
and we're talking about advice to solve
it. The point I'm saying is, how far behind do you want to? How much of a handicap do you want to place on Australian industry against all of its competitors?
This is the same nonsense. I'm quite confused, I must say, by Ross and some of these arguments. Why the coalition, when they were in government the previous time under John Howard, was saying we actually should be leaders. We actually should take the lead and not be waiting to see what happens elsewhere. We've got a responsibility to lead. And I think this whole debate about what we do on dealing with climate change is an ongoing good debate to have. We are not going to resile from our position. We are interested in the future generations. So we'll take advice from the economists, we'll take advice from the scientists, and we won't be running any scare campaign as the coalition did.
Do governments have to do what they said they'd do at the election, Jeff?
No, they don't. And if you look at history, they seldom do everything that they said they would. I think Ross's point disturbs me. I don't believe that the argument that says we should just wait for all these other countries, China and India and so on, to come along is in any way valid. The only countries that are able to take a lead in this sort of issue are those who have the luxury of doing so. Those who have strong economies, who have high standards of living. China is still trying to catch up with a vast majority of its population. India is not going to be able to be turning its attention to things like this for decades and decades. It's trying to feed people. We have the luxury, as do a number of other Western countries, of taking some lead in these matters, and we should do so.
Okay, let's move on. Revelations that the US government hacked into German Chancellor Angela Merkel's mobile phone come hard on the heels of the disclosures by Edward Snowden, an employee of the US government, that the US government's PRISM computer system collected phone and internet information from just about everybody. So what are the limits on government spying on citizens in an open Western democracy anyway? Is it ever allowable? And for what purposes? Doug Cameron.
Yeah, I think covert surveillance is appropriate if there is a threat to the nation, if there's a threat to individuals, and that's been done by would-be terrorists. I think there is an argument for that, but there has to be checks and balances on how that's carried out. And under our system, we've got an Auditor General of the security establishment. We've got a parliamentary committee, a joint parliamentary committee that looks at it. If you're going to take surveillance out, you have to get a warrant from the Attorney General in the case of the federal government. And if it's in some other areas, the federal police have to get it from a judge, a federal court judge.
Do we suspect, though, as we found out through PRISM, that's all very well, Doug's orderly system of validity is all very well, but as we found out through PRISM, half the government doesn't appear to know what their security intelligence services are actually doing.
That's why it's covert.
So exactly, because they don't actually trust the government. They think if they tell the government, then the purpose of their surveillance will be lost. Ross Cameron, do we believe that we know everything that governments are spying on?
No.
Or should know?
Well, I think one of the problems here is that technology has overtaken the kind of protocols and gentlemen's agreement that have previously governed intelligence sharing. And so today you can go to Google Mail and download a program at very low cost that will tell you whether anyone you have sent an email to has forwarded it on to someone else without their knowledge. You can surveil them. So what you have is now almost like the rainforest in Papua New Guinea swallowing up the village. I mean, the privacy concerns are just getting swept away by this vaulting capacity of the technology of all forms to monitor other people's behaviour.
Some people in the technology industry, in the social media industry, Google and Twitter, etc., have famously announced that privacy is dead. It doesn't exist anymore. What do you think, Jeff Cousins? Do we still have a right to privacy? Are we allowed to participate in the world and have a right to privacy? Put it that way.
Yeah, we certainly are, but it is true, I think. The definition of privacy has changed. I'll give you a simple example. If you go to many swimming pools in Sydney, you'll see a sign up, public swimming pools, a sign up on the wall saying no photographs by order of so-and-so, because people got worried about people who might prey on children taking photographs. All around the edge of those same swimming pools, you'll see the grandparents and the parents filming, taking pictures, uploading them. They're on the internet. They're on the other side of the world 30 seconds later. So people have decided of their own accord that the definition of privacy has changed, and they are putting some of their most personal information out there. Now, when you come to governments, however, that's a different matter. But I think most people don't realise that governments have always collected a vast amount of information of the mega sense, because they're looking for patterns in that information, and this particularly applies to telecommunications. They're looking for patterns or key words that might relate to terrorist activities or other things.
Well, they say they're looking for that, but we don't really know what they're looking for.
Well, that is different, however. When you come to say you're going to tap the phone of an individual, that's a different thing. And my belief is when you come to that, then there should be a court order.
Well, Doug is right to say that intelligence is justified by the existence of real threats to citizens. And so long as we have Al-Qaeda and militant Islam who place themselves outside of civilized engagement between nations, and then you have still the threat of nuclear weapons, the problem is if you have an intelligence failure, the consequences are so great that no one is going to sit around saying to ASIS and the Australian Intelligence Agency, we're really glad you had this deep-seated respect for everybody's privacy. They're going to say, why the hell did you not pick this up before it happened?
Should we worry about it, Doug Cameron? I mean, should in the end we worry about it? Are we too precious about this?
No,
in other words, if someone listens to your phone, do you really care?
Yes, I do, and I think, when you see what happened in the UK with the News Limited doing what they did, and, the Murdoch empire just taking it on themselves that they would invade the privacy of individuals in the UK, that's a big issue. And when you have security forces security agencies with huge rights, huge means to do a whole range of things, with that, I think, comes responsibility and accountability, and that's up to Parliament to make sure that's a strong responsibility and strong accountability.
But as we saw in the United States, of course, the Congress is not, and it took Edward Snowden to actually tell us things that we did not know.
Sure.
And according to everybody from the executive level of government down, we're never going to know.
Well, I mean, this is the issue about, what checks and balances, do you put in place? How confident can you be in those checks and balances? And I think under our Westminster system in Australia, we have strong checks and balances. But whether that's uncovered everything, who knows?
We don't know, do we?
Who knows?
We don't know, but I do think we should make a distinction between the collection of information relating to a particular individual and the use of that, and the analysis of aggregated information.
In other words,
governments have always done that, and I don't know, but you can bet your life the Australian government collects that mega data and has some analysis program.
Jeff Cousins is with us. Also, Doug Cameron, for Labor New South Wales Senator, of course, and Ross Cameron, former Liberal member for Parramatta in our Monday Political Forum. I said that Queensland's gone out on its own and passed tough anti-bikie legislation, and the ACT government's passed its own marriage laws. Heavens above. Should there be a national approach on all these things, on this as in so many other issues? Are there any things that only the states and territories should do because they do them better? than the feds, or should we put the states and territories concept in the sugar bag and dump it? What do you think, Doug Cameron?
I'd like to have a look at being able to put it in a sugar bag and dump it, but as a senator for New South Wales, who owes my job to New South Wales, that's a brave thing.
I want you to reach for a higher cause here, Senator.
And the higher cause is, it would be great if we could reduce the number of levels of political overview in this country. But the reality is the Constitution is quite clear. The Constitution is very strong. The Constitution will not be changed, I don't think, in my lifetime. And, look at trying to get minor changes to the Constitution is almost impossible.
But that wasn't really my question, with all due respect. That wasn't my question. My question was, are there things that the states and territories do better than could be done by the feds?
Oh, look, it just depends, and my answer would be no. I think if the responsibility was with the federal level of government, then you would put in the bureaucracies. And remember, bureaucracy means a perfect approach to dealing with things. Then I think you could do it, but. I think a federal government and a local government, for me, is the way to go, but that's not going to happen in my lifetime.
It's been Labor policy for a long time, all the way back to Whitlam's day, I suppose, the idea of that. What did you think of that, Ross Cameron? Without getting into the argument about states' rights, etc., are there things that states and territories do better than the feds?
Well, I would like to see many more areas of state uniqueness, and I would like to see us devolve more responsibilities to the states. At the moment, we live in the worst of all worlds, where we are trying to, in effect, bureaucratise the states with centralised administration from Canberra. I think the national education curriculum has been a disaster. It has simply exported mediocrity from Canberra to all of the other states. I would like to see the states genuinely competing with each other in a sort of a bristling, innovation-led competition to attract the best minds, the capital, the resources to their respective jurisdictions. If we're going to have states, they should be great states. They should be innovative states. They should be competing with each other to be different and better.
But isn't the problem with that, as we've seen this in the past, all the states do is just give away their tax base constantly to attract businesses to their state, and they end up having no tax base at all and putting their hand up to Canberra saying we haven't got any money. And the reason they haven't got any money is they won't levy any taxes on businesses to raise it. Jeff Cousins.
Well, look, I think Doug's right. There's no chance it's ever going to happen. But going back to your theoretical question, the states demonstrably do some things better than the Commonwealth. I mean, you wouldn't want the Commonwealth government, surely, to try and run the education system, as Ross just said. It wouldn't work. The states are better at execution. The federal government is better at overall policy making. And if you could get that balance a little bit better, it might be good. But if you go back in history, some of the best things that have happened in this country have been introduced by one state and then taken up by the federal government, going right back to South Australia in 1894, giving women the right to vote, and so on and so forth. So I think a lot of the great policy innovation that's come into this country has actually come initially through state legislation, and then it's spread around the country. Not all of it by any means, but quite a lot of it. So I don't think anything's going to happen in our lifetime, or frankly anyone else's. I don't think you could ever win a referendum in this country.
I'm not suggesting we would. No, I'm not suggesting.
I know you're not.
I'm not suggesting we should. But if we think, as broadcasters, we know the power of local in broadcasting. That's what people generally want to hear. They want to know what's happening in their community. Is the essence of the power of politics and people's belief in it essentially, Ross Cameron, a really local thing? That is, they're not going to participate in the process unless they see it in front of them.
Yeah, I think human beings do filter the world according to what passes before their eyeballs. There's absolutely no question that, and this is part of the power of television, that there have been plenty of, North Korea has never been a great global story because the media hasn't been allowed in. And so we might have had 1 million people starve to death in 2000 in North Korea, but because we didn't see pictures. And of course, with the Vietnam War, it was television that empowered the opposition to the Vietnam War, and human beings are intensely local. I would door knock my electorate regularly, walk up to the front door, knock on it and say, have you got a view on whether the government should introduce the GST? And they would say, well, I don't have a view on that, but I'd love you to do something about the graffiti and vandalism down in the local park. And it is the case that we tend to see the world very much through the lens of our neighbourhood, and we always will, and that's one of the reasons why state and local governments will continue to deliver services to local communities.
This is our Police Forum. It's Monday. Doug Cameron, Labor New South Wales Senator, of course, Jeff Cousins and Ross Cameron, who's a former Liberal member for Parramatta as well. We've been talking this afternoon a lot about setbacks because of the tragedies that people have been caught up with in the fires in the Blue Mountains. Personally, for you, what setbacks have you suffered and how did you come back from it? Doug Cameron.
I suppose the biggest setback I had was a personal setback when, at the age of 27, I gave up drinking. That wasn't a setback for me. It was a great thing, but the setback was to end up getting caught in a web of alcoholic drinking and getting some help to get out of that, and I haven't touched anything for about 35 years.
How have you survived a Labor Party Chinese meal with that?
And given that I'm allergic to prawns, it's even harder. You see, I've survived and done okay.
Yeah, okay. But battling alcoholism, Ross Cameron, for you?
Well, I asked a trusted friend how I should answer this question, having seen it on your little cheat sheet, and he said to me, Ross, my advice to you is just avoid that question at all costs. But I will simply say that, I mean, I got, as a parliamentarian who loses, I mean, effectively you get sacked by 100,000 people in the glaze of the national media, and it's binary, it's either win-lose, and I lost 2004. I mean, so I've been sacked. I've suffered a failure of a marriage. I've had a business fail over the course of my life. So I have not been short on disappointments. But I guess I have always believed, partly from my sort of Scottish Presbyterian sort of parental influence, that
no relative of mine,
that resilience, is one of life's most critical qualities. And if you just do the maths on what the chances are of the right DNA combinations over thousands of unions, over hundreds of thousands of years of you and me being here in this studio, it's an extraordinary miracle that we're here. So we only have a certain number of days allotted to us on this earth. We don't know exactly what happens afterwards. So my question is, like they said to George Burns on his 90th birthday, how does it feel? And he said it's much better than the alternative.
What about you, Jeff Cousins?
Look, my setbacks have been very significant personal tragedies in my family, but I've been able to come back from them because equally in my family I've had enormous love and support. Imagine if you don't have that. That's the thing that occurs to me if you haven't got that support. I think in the bushfires, coming back to that, which is where you started your question, we see Australia at its best. We see Australians better at giving that sort of wonderful support than just about any other country on earth. And as an Australian, you're very proud of that. Where we see the worst of it, in my view, is our attitude towards those desperate people who try to come to this country seeking asylum by boat, and there we ought to be thoroughly ashamed of our attitude. It is the exact opposite of what we do in these other tragedies.
Because strangely, actually, if those people were in the street, or we could meet them...
We would help them.
Or we would meet them, and we would meet them if they were on the boat and we were alongside the boat, we would, as Australians, help them.
Of course we would.
Wouldn't we? Yeah.
Of course we would.
We have ideas in our heads.
And this has been a shocking failure of our political leadership on both sides of the parliament. The Libs did a bad job with it, and Labor did a worse one.
Doug Cameron, quickly.
You see, I think we're still needing government to help people, and I'm very concerned that in the Blue Mountains, when people couldn't get access to their home, couldn't get any power for 3 or 4 days, they've been denied rights that other people had. So I'm calling on Tony Abbott to fix that, and that's what Tony Abbott can do.
Okay, look, we've run out of time. I'd love to keep talking, but sadly we can't because of the passage of time. Doug Cameron, thank you. Jeff Cousins, thank you. And Ross Cameron, thank you too for participating in our forum.